They said service was an honor, that to fight for the Emperor was the highest calling a human could ever receive. But when they came for me, it didn't feel like honor. It felt like theft. They didn't take my life. Not yet, but they took everything that made it mine. My home, my name, my breath. And when the shuttle's engines screamed above the mud of my village, I remember looking up and thinking, this is what it sounds like when a god eats. You don't volunteer for the god. You're chosen, not because you're brave or strong or loyal. You're chosen because you can hold a lasgun and die quietly when the time comes. There's no ceremony, no speech, just a data slate with your name on it, and the silent understanding that the Emperor's light burns brightest over those who never live long enough to see it. The truth is, no one survives the draft, not really. Some of us die on the shuttle, some die in training, and the rest, we just keep dying, slower, longer, one world at a time. It began on a day that looked like any other, the same low clouds pressing against the valley, the same smell of wet grain and machine oil drifting from the fields. The sky had been bruised with gray since dawn, the kind that made the light feel tired before it even touched the ground. I was mending a feed line beside the water pumps when I heard the first roar of engines. It wasn't thunder, it was the sound of the Imperium arriving, deep, cold and certain. Every head in the fields turned upward. The old men crossed themselves with shaking hands, tracing the aquila over their chests. No one said it, but we all knew. The tithe season had come. The administratum called it recruitment rotation, but that word carried no comfort. To be drafted was to be erased, plucked from soil and memory both. Families would go home half empty tonight, and by dawn names would already be forgotten. The ships came low, their black hulls stenciled with the sigil of the Astra Militarum. Dust spiraled beneath their thrusters, choking the air with a bitter taste of ozone. A few children cried. The rest of us just stared. The sound of the engines felt like judgment. The overseer ran through the settlement bellows, shouting for everyone to assemble near the granary. His voice cracked with something between authority and fear. I remember my father's hands gripping my shoulder, rough and trembling. "Don't look afraid," he said, but his voice betrayed him. No one ever looked brave when the Emperor came to take what was his. By the time the shuttle doors opened, the world had gone quiet. From the dust emerged three figures, two in flak armor, one in the heavy robes of the adeptus administratum. The robed one carried a data slate, the others, shock mauls. Their faces were expressionless, the kind that had seen this ritual performed 1,000 times on 1,000 worlds. One by one they began calling names. Each name felt like a sentence. The chosen would step forward, trembling, clutching whatever they could carry, a token, a charm, a photograph if they were lucky. The rest of us watched in silence. Mothers pressed their faces into their children's hair. The smell of sweat and dust thickened until it felt like grief itself had weight. When my name came, I didn't move. For a heartbeat, I thought they might skip it. That the Emperor, in his endless benevolence, might forget me. But the clerk looked up, eyes pale and mechanical behind the lenses. "Step forward." The soldiers flanked him, mauls humming softly. I felt my father's hand slip away. I walked. My boots sank into the mud. The noise of the engines drowned the pounding in my chest. The clerk scanned the sigil on my wristband, pressed a stylus to his slate, and nodded. "Fit for service," he muttered, already moving to the next name. They didn't tell us where we were going, or when. We were loaded into transport trucks that smelled of rust and fuel, the kind used to haul grain or livestock. The doors closed, and the sound of the outside world vanished. Someone started crying in the dark. Another whispered a prayer to the Emperor. I tried to, but the words stuck in my throat. Hours passed, maybe days. Time became a slow crawl of engine rumble and fear. When the doors finally opened, the light was harsh and metallic. We had arrived at the orbital port, where tithe ships waited like vultures. Columns of conscripts marched toward loading ramps under the barked orders of officers. Servitors moved among them, stamping barcodes onto necks and forearms. A man beside me asked what planet we were going to. A commissar overheard and struck him with a baton before he could finish. The man didn't get back up. The rest of us learned the rule immediately. Questions were luxuries of the unchosen. As we boarded, I looked back once, just once, through the open ramp. The valley below was a blur of gray and brown. My father's hut was a speck. Smoke from the pumps coiled upward, swallowed by the same clouds that had been there when the day began. For a moment, it almost looked like home again. Then the doors sealed shut, and the stars took its place. That was the day I stopped being a son, a worker, a person. From that moment forward, I was a number, a body in service to an empire too vast to notice when it devoured me. The ship groaned as it left the atmosphere, a sound so deep it rattled through my bones. The air inside was stale, recycled breath and machine oil. Rows of us sat on metal benches, knees touching, backs pressed to the bulkhead. No one spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the warp engines, building slowly until it became a kind of droning heartbeat that filled the void where thought used to be. A man across from me vomited into his hands. Another started muttering prayers, the same verse over and over, like if he stopped, the ship might fall apart. I tried not to listen, but the words dug their way in anyway. Through his light we are cleansed, through his will we are delivered. Delivered, that word stuck in my head. Delivered to what? The lights flickered, then shifted to a dim red hue. A siren blared once, a harsh metallic tone, and the intercom crackled to life. Conscripts of the 917th draft, a voice said, calm and cold as ice. You are bound for induction under the authority of Segmentum Command. You will receive training upon arrival at the Astra Militarum Foundry world of Varkos Prime. You will speak when spoken to. You will obey when commanded. You will serve until death. The message ended. The silence that followed was heavier than the ship itself. Someone whispered, until death, and a guardsman near the door hit him with a shock maul. No one else spoke after that. Sleep came in fits. The metal walls seemed to breathe with us, expanding, contracting, exhaling heat. When I closed my eyes, I saw my home again, my father's face fading into the mist, my mother's empty chair by the stove. I wondered if they'd remember me when the next tithe came, or if my name would just become one more sound the wind carried away. When the ship finally lurched out of warp, the sudden silence was worse than the noise had been. Then came the announcements, the barking orders, the hiss of hydraulics. The ramp dropped with a shuddering clang, and light poured in too bright, too clean. Varkos Prime was nothing like the world I'd left. The sky was a dead yellow, filled with smog and ash. The horizon was lined with black towers and gunmetal foundries, each one coughing smoke into the heavens. The ground was iron and soot. Even the air burned your throat when you breathed too deeply. We were herded down the ramp by barking officers, each one dressed in crisp grey uniforms with red-trimmed caps. Their eyes were empty, as if they saw only potential bodies, not people. A commissar stood at the end of the line, his coat flowing behind him like a shadow. His eyes followed us, calculating, patient. One man in front of me stumbled on the ramp. The commissar drew his bolt pistol and fired without a word. The shot echoed through the yard like thunder. The man's body fell into the dust, twitching once before going still. The rest of us straightened immediately. The commissar holstered his weapon and continued watching, unbothered. Discipline, he said quietly, is the Emperor's first gift to the unworthy. They stripped us of our clothes, our belongings, our names. We were shaved bald, sprayed with antiseptic foam and assigned serial numbers. The smell of the disinfectant burned my nostrils. Rows of servitors stamped the numbers into metal tags, which were hung around our necks. Mine read C19841. I ran my fingers over it again and again that night, as if the metal might still warm with something human. Training began before dawn. The instructors didn't shout, not at first. They just watched. Every movement we made, every hesitation, every glance was measured. The weak was separated immediately and taken elsewhere. We never saw them again. The rest of us learned quickly what mattered: endurance, silence, obedience. Meals were a paste that tasted like rust and chemicals. Sleep came in 4-hour shifts on cold metal bunks. Osark in Woisidbol. We marched until our legs trembled, ran drills until our lungs burned, and learned to fire lascars until the recoil felt like breathing. But the hardest part wasn't the hunger or the exhaustion. It was the erasure, the slow grinding away of identity. Day by day, the instructors replaced our memories with orders, our fears with silence. We weren't taught how to think, only how to obey. One night a recruit beside me whispered that he'd been a poet once. He said he used to write about rivers and wind. I told him to be quiet, not because I wanted to but because I was afraid of what the walls might hear. He smiled anyway, and said, maybe the Emperor will read them for me. The next morning his bunk was empty. By the end of the second week, the man I'd been before was gone. My hands no longer trembled when I loaded a weapon, my thoughts no longer wandered home. The number on my chest was all that was left, and when the instructors gathered us before the firing range, our first kill order waiting on the board, I realized the cruelest truth of all, that the Imperium doesn't create soldiers, it consumes them. They told us training would make us soldiers, but it felt more like being unmade, stripped, hollowed, then rebuilt from pain and obedience. The first dawn on Varkos Prime did not rise with light. It came with klaxons, roaring through iron barracks thick with frost and chemical stench. We stumbled into the open yards where ash fell like grey snow, the horizon dim under the smog of 1,000 burning manufactorums. The sergeants were already waiting, black coats slick with oil, shock mauls humming faintly in the cold air. They didn't speak of honor or duty, only survival. The first lesson came when a boy from our hive refused to stand straight. His eyes darted, searching for mercy that did not exist. The sergeant's maul cracked across his skull, and the sound was wet, final. No one moved, no one even dared to breathe. We learned in that instant that the Imperium's mercy was the space between the next breath and the next command. Hours bled into days, and days into something longer. We ran until our lungs scraped raw, marched through freezing sludge until our boots peeled from our feet, and recited the Emperor's catechisms until our voices broke. Sleep was a rumor, dreams a forgotten indulgence. Those who faltered were dragged away by medicae servitors that reeked of disinfectant and despair. Some returned, pale and trembling, their eyes unfocused, the light inside them replaced by quiet obedience. Others did not return at all. We were taught to fire lasguns at straw silhouettes painted with the snarling faces of orcs, the silver masks of necrons, the bloated effigies of chaos. The instructors said we must aim for the head, always the head. But even when the targets burst into ash, I couldn't shake the feeling that none of it mattered, because in the corner of the range, a servitor was collecting spent charge packs with the same rhythm as our breaths, a perfect, meaningless cycle. It hit me then. This was not training. This was conditioning. I began to forget the sound of my mother's voice, her face blurred, replaced by the endless monotone of orders and chants. The drill abbots made us kneel before a golden aquila painted on the barracks wall. We repeated, "The Emperor protects." They struck anyone whose tone faltered. "The Emperor protects," again and again, until the words lost all meaning, until they became breath itself. One night, as I knelt there, my knees bleeding against the cold metal floor, I whispered it once more, but this time, I wasn't sure if it was a prayer or a surrender. There was a man in my squad, Jorvan, older than most, his skin rough with the lines of a laborer, his hands still carrying the calluses of factory work. He spoke softly when the overseers were gone, said he'd once seen the stars from a hive window, through the pollution haze, and thought they looked like the eyes of the dead. I didn't understand him then, but I remembered his words days later, when he didn't wake from punishment detail. They said he was weak, unfit to bear the Emperor's will. His body was dragged away before dawn. The next morning, his bunk was already filled by someone new. The smell of promethium and rust became the smell of our existence. It clung to skin, to breath, to memory. The barracks grew quieter with each passing rotation, as though the world was swallowing sound itself. Only the hum of the generators and the distant scream of aircraft punctured the silence. And beneath it all, the whispered thought none of us dared to voice: what were we training for? We hadn't seen a battlefield yet, but the war had already begun inside us. The part of me that once feared death was gone, the part that dreamed had been crushed under boot and drill. What remained was something simpler, harder, a shape molded by pain and repetition, and in that shape I began to understand the Imperium's truth. It didn't need believers, it needed instruments, flesh that obeys, souls that endure. The instructors called us guardsmen, long before we earned the title, but we weren't soldiers, not yet. We were bodies learning to forget the difference between obedience and faith. And when the time came to step onto the transport that would carry us into war, I realized with a hollow certainty, I was no longer a man drafted from my hive. I was a piece of the machine, already rusting, already expendable. They said the Emperor watched over us, but as I looked up at the sickly red sky of Varkos Prime, I wondered, if he truly watched, why did he never blink? Departure came without ceremony. There were no banners, no hymns, no grand speeches of glory, only the mechanical rhythm of boots on ferrocrete and the dull thunder of troop carriers swallowing men whole. We marched in silence toward the embarkation platform, where a line of rusting transports awaited, their hulls etched with old bullet scars and half-faded scripture. The sky above burned with industrial fire, a false dawn that cast everything in the color of old blood. The sergeants barked orders through vox grills, their voices distorted into metallic growls. Each name called was another life erased, another human reduced to serial code and assignment number. When mine came, I stepped forward without hesitation. It wasn't courage, I had simply run out of resistance. I had learned that in the Imperium, hesitation was the same as heresy. Inside the transport, the air was hot, wet, and metallic. Rows of conscripts sat strapped into place, their faces pale and expressionless beneath the flickering lumen lights. Across from me sat a boy no older than 16, his lasgun trembling in his grip. He whispered fragments of a prayer, "By his light I am cleansed, by his will I endure," but his eyes were far away, glassy with fear. I tried to speak, to offer something human, but the words withered before leaving my throat. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been burned out of us. The engines roared, and the vibration sank into our bones. The doors sealed shut with a hiss, cutting off the last breath of Varkos Prime's poisoned air. For a moment everything was still, then the world lurched downward as the transport ascended into the void. Someone vomited, someone else laughed, a sharp, broken sound that turned quickly into a sob. I stared at the floor until the noise faded, counting the seconds between my heartbeats, imagining that each one brought me closer to something that might make sense again. When gravity returned, it came with pain. The straps dug into flesh, blood rushed through numb limbs, and the lights flickered back on to reveal a new kind of silence. The kind that comes when everyone knows they've crossed a line they can never return from. The bulkhead creaked, the hum of the void engine murmured through the metal, and I realized the stars outside were not beautiful. They were cold, unfeeling, and impossibly far away. Weeks passed, or maybe days. Time lost its meaning in the endless hum of the ship. We ate tasteless nutrient paste, drank recycled water that smelled faintly of disinfectant, and dreamed of home only to wake in suffocating darkness. Rumors spread like infection, about the world we were being sent to, about enemies that couldn't die, about soldiers who vanished after their first deployment. The officers ignored it all. They walked among us like statues of brass, silent and impenetrable, their faith absolute or entirely absent. Then came the indoctrination rituals. We were led into a chamber, lit by the flicker of incense flames, where robed priests of the ecclesiarchy chanted over us. They anointed our foreheads with promethium oil, leaving burning marks that seared through skin and reason alike. "You are the Emperor's will," they said. "You are his wrath made flesh." Each word struck like a hammer. I could feel the belief pressing against my thoughts, reshaping them, grinding them down to obedience. For some it was comfort, for others, erasure. For me it was both. One night, I woke to find a man across the aisle muttering to himself. His eyes were open but unfocused, his lips trembling with a prayer that looped endlessly. "He sees me," he whispered. "He sees me." When the Medicae servitors arrived, they didn't speak. They injected him with something clear and cold, and he fell silent forever. They carried him away, his body limp, his prayer unfinished. The next day, no one mentioned him. His bunk remained empty until the next morning, when it didn't anymore. By the time the proximity alarms sounded, I had forgotten my own reflection. The man I had been before the draft, the worker, the son, the dreamer, was gone. What remained was a vessel carved by fear and faith, hollow enough to be filled. The voice over the vox announced that we would make planetfall soon. The deck shuddered as atmospheric entry began, and I gripped my rifle as if it were the only thing keeping me tethered to existence. Through the small viewport beside me, I saw the world that awaited us, a dead gray sphere wrapped in storm and ash. It didn't even have a name in the announcements, only a designation code. Somewhere down there, men like me were already dying in trenches carved through ruin and mud. Somewhere down there, the Emperor's will was being enforced through fire and blood, and soon I would join them. As the ship descended, I thought of Jorvan, the man who said the stars looked like the eyes of the dead. For the first time, I understood him, because as I watched those distant lights fade behind the clouds, it felt like the dead were indeed watching. And maybe, I thought, they were the only ones who truly cared. The first thing I felt wasn't fear, it was weight. The dropship slammed through the atmosphere like a burning stone, every impact rattling through my bones. The cabin filled with smoke from overheated systems, and the scent of burnt metal clung to our throats like blood. When the retro thrusters fired, the world became a single, shaking roar. Men vomited, some prayed, some simply stared ahead, eyes empty as icons. Then came the impact, sudden, brutal, final. We had landed. When the doors blew open, the world outside screamed. The wind tore through the compartment, dragging dust and static into our faces. The ground was mud, thick, black and alive with the stench of decay. Above, the sky was a dying bruise, streaked with fire from orbital bombardments that never ceased. The sergeants shouted for us to move, to form ranks, to become what they had spent months forging. My legs obeyed before my mind did. Training had overwritten instinct. I ran because stopping meant death. The first sound of last fire was almost beautiful, thin, sharp, like glass shattering in rhythm. Then came the heavier reports, autocannons, bolters, artillery screaming somewhere far beyond the fog. Shapes moved through the haze, distant but real enough to make my pulse break rhythm. When one of them collapsed in a flash of red, I realized it had been one of us. I didn't even see what killed him. I just saw the aftermath, the way his body folded into the mud, the way his helmet rolled forward until it struck my boot. "Advance," someone shouted. For the Emperor, the cry rose like thunder, hollow and desperate, and for a moment I shouted too. It wasn't faith, it was survival. The act of pretending you believed gave you something to hold on to in the storm. The lasgun's recoil felt small compared to the noise that filled my head, the clash of orders, the scream of wounded, the hum of engines somewhere high above. The war didn't look like the propaganda murals painted on the hab walls of my hive. There was no glory, only mud, fire, and the knowledge that every step forward erased another life. We reached the first trench just as the bombardment began. Explosions tore open the earth around us, flinging soil and limbs into the air. I threw myself down, mud splattering across my visor, heart hammering against my ribs. Someone landed beside me, a woman from another platoon, face streaked with soot. Her mouth moved, but I couldn't hear her words. Then a shell landed close, and she was gone, just gone. Nothing left but a burning shadow where she had been. I don't remember standing up, but I did. My body moved through the chaos like it belonged to someone else. I fired until the barrel of my rifle glowed red, reloaded, and fired again. Somewhere in the madness, I realized we weren't shooting at anything visible. The enemy was buried in the smoke, unseen, unending, a phantom that existed only to justify the slaughter. Every burst of light was an act of faith. Maybe the next shot would matter. Maybe none of them ever did. When the order to fall back came, half the squad didn't respond. Some were dead, others too broken to move. The rest stumbled through the mud, dragging the wounded, leaving trails of red that sank quickly into the ground. I remember tripping over a corpse and realizing it was the boy from the transport, the one who had whispered prayers into the dark. His eyes were still open, fixed upward, unblinking. For a heartbeat, I thought he might still be whispering. Then I saw that his throat was gone. We regrouped behind a ridge where the Medicae tents burned in silence. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and cooked flesh. The sky thundered again as orbital strikes hit somewhere beyond the horizon. Someone was laughing near me, wild and hysterical, until a commissar shot him through the skull without breaking stride. "Cowardice is treason," he said, to no one in particular, and kept walking. When night fell, if you could call it night under a sky that never stopped burning, I sat against a wall of sandbags and cleaned my lasgun in the dark. My hands shook so violently that I nearly dropped it. Around me the others stared into the void with that same hollow stillness. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been consumed by the noise. That was the first day, the first taste of the Emperor's War, and as I stared at the faint glow of fire through the smoke, I realized what all the sermons had meant. The Emperor doesn't protect us. He endures us. He demands that we keep breathing, fighting, dying, not for victory, but because there is no other choice. When I finally closed my eyes, I saw the stars again, cold, distant, and watching. Only now, I understood their silence. In the Imperium, even the heavens do not weep. They say that after your first battle, you stop fearing death. That's a lie. You just learn to live beside it, like a shadow you can't escape, whispering your name every time you close your eyes. The days that followed blurred into a single endless rhythm of noise and ash. We dug trenches, filled them with the bodies of the fallen, and dug new ones over their graves. The rain never stopped. It wasn't real rain, just the chemical runoff from the bombardments, falling in sheets that burned skin and corroded armor. The smell of it clung to everything, even the rations. The officers said we were holding the line, but there was no line, only shifting mud and shattered earth. Every dawn we advanced a few meters. Every night we lost them again. The enemy was unseen, relentless. Sometimes we glimpsed shapes moving through the haze, silhouettes that defied reason, too large, too fluid. When they came close, the air itself seemed to tremble. I stopped asking what they were. It was easier not to know. Sleep came in fragments, stolen between shell bursts. I dreamed of the hive I'd left behind, of the endless corridors and the hum of machines. In those dreams the air was warm, and the lights never flickered. But every time I reached for something familiar, it dissolved into static and screaming. I'd wake up to find my fingers clutching the lasgun, slick with sweat, pulse hammering in my throat. Around me, others did the same. None of us spoke of our dreams. We knew better. Dreams were dangerous here. They made you remember you were human. The commissars patrolled constantly. Their presence was a kind of weight pressing down on us, heavier than the armor we wore. They didn't shout. They didn't need to. A single glance from one of them could strip a man of courage faster than any bullet. Once, during a lull in the bombardment, I watched a soldier hesitate before charging over the parapet. The commissar stepped forward, placed a bolt pistol against the back of his skull, and fired without a word. The rest of us climbed out immediately. None of us hesitated again. The battlefield had its own language. The sound of last fire, the shriek of artillery, the wet crunch of boots over mud and bone. After a while, you began to understand it. You could tell by the pitch of the screams how close the enemy was. You could tell by the rhythm of gunfire how long you had left before the next assault, and in that grotesque familiarity, something inside you shifted. You stopped thinking about victory. You stopped thinking about home. You just existed. One breath, one trigger pull, one more heartbeat stolen from inevitability. We had been stationed on that nameless world for 3 months. When the first Commissar's surreal sermons began, they gathered us in the trench at dusk, torches flickering against the walls of mud and blood. A priest's voice echoed through a vox speaker, tinny and distorted, proclaiming the Emperor's eternal vigilance. Through suffering we are purified, he said. Through death, we are made eternal. Around me, men bowed their heads. I wanted to believe him. Emperor knows, I wanted to, but as I looked at the faces beside me, hollow, gray, lifeless, I realized purification wasn't what we were being offered. It was erasure. That night, during the third bombardment, I watched the horizon vanish under a storm of fire. The sky turned white, the earth split open, and for a moment I thought we'd all been erased. When the noise faded, there was nothing left of the forward trench but charred craters and silence. I remember walking through it after the all-clear, boots sinking into the mud where bones poked through like broken fingers. One of the bodies still moved, a man missing half his face, whispering words that were no longer words. I knelt beside him, not out of pity, but because I needed to hear what he was saying. It was a prayer, or maybe just a reflex. He died before he finished it. And I realized something then, something simple and cruel. We weren't fighting for survival anymore. We were fighting because there was nothing else to do. The next morning we received a new order: push forward into the ruins of a once great city, its name long lost, its towers reduced to jagged silhouettes against the burning horizon. We were to reclaim it in the Emperor's name. I looked around at the faces of my squad, and saw nothing human left in them, just exhaustion and obedience. When the whistle blew, we climbed out of the trench once more, stepping over the dead like they were part of the earth itself. And as we moved toward that city of ghosts, last fire cutting through the smog and thunder rolling across the ruined plain, I felt a strange calm settle inside me. Maybe this was what faith truly was. Not belief, not hope, but the quiet acceptance that everything ends the same way. We entered the city at dawn, though the sky never changed. The smoke was too thick for sunlight to matter. What remained of the once proud metropolis was a labyrinth of collapsed blocks and melted spires. The walls we passed were carved with murals, fragments of lives that had meant something once. Children playing, workers praying, lovers holding each other beneath banners of the Imperium, all of it turned to charcoal. The ground was glass in some places, melted by orbital bombardment. Every step crunched like breaking bones. We moved in silence, las guns raised, every shadow an enemy. The city felt alive in the wrong way, breathing in our fear, exhaling echoes that weren't ours. I kept catching movement at the edges of my vision. Sometimes it was just wind stirring the dust, sometimes it wasn't. We were ambushed before the second block. The first warning was the sound, not the usual roar of gunfire, but a low chittering that made my teeth ache. Then came the flashes of movement, too fast to follow. The first man to die didn't even scream, he just vanished into the rubble, his weapon clattering after him. The sergeant barked orders, but they were swallowed by the chaos. Lars' fire streaked through the gloom, hitting nothing. The things hunting us were smarter than animals, crueler than men. I remember ducking behind a broken column, pressing my back to the cold stone. The air was filled with static, the smell of ozone and blood. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Across from me, Trooper Val tried to reload, but his fingers slipped. He muttered a prayer between clenched teeth, the Emperor's name over and over, like it might change the outcome. Then something pulled him backward into the dark. His scream lasted half a heartbeat. When it was over, there were only 5 of us left. The rest had been taken. By what, I still don't know. The city swallowed them whole, as if it had been waiting for us. The sergeant ordered us to fall back, but the Vox was dead. Every direction looked the same, endless ruins, endless smoke. We moved anyway because standing still meant thinking, and thinking meant breaking. By nightfall the temperature dropped sharply. We found shelter in the shell of a collapsed manufactorum. Inside, the machines were frozen mid-motion, like the workers had vanished in an instant centuries ago. Their tools still lay where they fell. I sat against a cracked wall, helmet off, trying to breathe through the metallic taste in the air. That was when I first noticed the voices. Not from my squad. They were silent, lost in their own nightmares, but faint whispers that drifted through the ruins. They sounded like comm static at first, fragmented, half-formed. Then they began to take shape. Some spoke my name, some spoke words I didn't understand. I tried to block them out, but every time I closed my eyes I saw faces, not of the enemy, but of the ones I'd left behind. My mother, my brother, the girl who sold bread near the factory gates, all staring, their eyes hollow and accusing. I told myself it was exhaustion, just fatigue and fear, but the next morning the whispers were louder. One of the squad, I think his name was Derek, started talking back to them. He said they were guiding us, that the city was speaking the Emperor's will. We tried to silence him, but the commissar wasn't there anymore. None of the command was. We were ghosts already, just pretending to follow orders that no longer existed. Derek wandered off during the second night. We found what was left of him a few hours later, or rather what he'd become. His armor was split open from the inside, his flesh covered in inscriptions burned into the skin. They weren't imperial prayers. I don't know what language they were, but they glowed faintly in the dark. We didn't touch him, we just left. The city felt hungrier after that. The air itself seemed to pulse with unseen life. Sometimes we heard the sound of marching, whole battalions moving somewhere nearby, but when we turned the corner, there was nothing. No footprints, no bodies, just dust, swirling endlessly. On the 4th day we stumbled upon a cathedral. It was mostly intact, though the statues of the saints had melted into formless shapes. The great stained glass window above the altar still stood, its colors warped by heat. It showed the Emperor ascending into the stars, arms outstretched, light radiating from his form, but his face had been blackened by fire. The glass shattered right where his eyes should have been. We entered anyway, habit maybe, faith maybe not. Inside we found candles still burning on the altar. That shouldn't have been possible. No one had lived here for decades. The sergeant knelt and began to pray. The rest of us followed, more out of desperation than belief. As I bowed my head, I felt something, not peace, not hope, but a weight pressing down on my chest, like the city itself was watching, listening, waiting for us to break. When we left the cathedral, the horizon was burning again. The bombardment had resumed, closer this time. The sky turned to fire, and I realized the city wasn't dead at all. It was alive, and we were the infection inside it. We didn't speak after that. There was nothing left to say, only the sound of boots on shattered glass, the distant echo of last fire, and the whispers that never stopped. I don't remember when I stopped counting the days. Time lost its meaning somewhere between the bombardments and the silences that followed. The city had no sun, only the glow of fires that never went out. We slept in shifts, if you could call it sleep. Brief spells of trembling half-consciousness broken by distant screams and the soft hum of machinery buried deep beneath the rubble. It was as if the city itself was breathing, restless and alive. We were 4 now. The sergeant, 2 troopers and me. The rest had vanished into the streets or gone mad and run into the dark. The sergeant still clung to the manual, quoting imperial catechisms with a trembling voice. He said faith was our weapon, but his eyes said otherwise. Every time he recited a verse, he looked around as if expecting something or someone to answer. Once, we heard a child crying somewhere beyond the collapsed walls. It was faint, fragile and terribly human. The others said it was a trick. I said nothing, but that night, I dreamed of the same sound, not in pain but in laughter. When I woke, my lasgun was gone. I found it later, standing upright in the corner of the room, perfectly balanced. No one had touched it. The days bled into each other, and the air began to taste like metal and rot. My skin itched beneath the flak armor, and my thoughts itched worse. Every sound felt wrong. The way the wind moved, the echo of our footsteps. Even my heartbeat felt unnatural, like something was keeping it in rhythm for me. The sergeant said we'd find a regroup point near the old mag train tunnels. I wanted to believe him. We followed him through streets that all looked the same, walls scarred by fire, windows shattered, statues defaced by hands long dead. At one intersection, we found a pile of helmets arranged neatly in a circle. All of them were Imperial issue. All of them had bullet holes in the forehead. I stared at them too long until the sergeant's voice cut through my thoughts. He told me to keep moving, that thinking was what killed you out here. That night, we found shelter in an underground station. The tracks were warped, but the signs were still legible, fragments of old words half buried in dust. Departures, arrivals, salvation. I don't know why that last one was there. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe I only imagined it. The sergeant fell asleep first. His breathing was ragged, uneven. One of the troopers sat near the entrance, keeping watch. The other, Merin, I think his name was, sat beside me. He was younger than I'd realized. There was still a softness to his face that the war hadn't erased yet. He asked if I thought the Emperor could hear us. I told him I didn't know. He nodded, then whispered, maybe he doesn't want to. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. The thought lingered in the air like smoke. Maybe the Emperor had turned his gaze elsewhere. Maybe we were too small to matter anymore. I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes the station was empty. The fires in the corner had burned out. My breath fogged the air. The temperature had dropped suddenly, unnaturally. I called for the others, but only my echo answered. Then faintly, I heard a voice, the sergeant's, calling from the tunnels. I followed the sound. My boots splashed in shallow pools of stagnant water. The deeper I went, the louder the whispers became. They weren't words anymore, not really, just noise shaped like meaning. They seemed to curl around me, touching the edges of thought. My flashlight flickered. When it came back on, I wasn't in the tunnel anymore. Or maybe I was. But it had changed. The walls were moving, breathing in slow, wet pulses. I could hear machinery, gears turning deep inside the stone, and between the vibrations, a low hum, the same hum I'd heard since arriving on this cursed world, now clearer than ever. The sergeant stood ahead, facing a wall that wasn't a wall at all. It was open flesh, glistening and alive, pulsating in rhythm with the hum. He turned as I approached, and for a moment, I thought I saw relief in his eyes. Then I realized he wasn't looking at me. He was looking through me. He said something then, something I can still hear but can't remember. The sound of it wasn't human. His mouth moved, but the voice came from everywhere. From the air, the walls, the ground beneath my feet. I tried to back away, but the floor shifted, gripping my boots. The air stank of burning incense and decay. Then everything stopped. The hum, the breathing, the whispers, silence, vast and terrible. The sergeant dropped to his knees and began to laugh. I wanted to scream at him, to pull him away, but my voice was gone. My body wouldn't move. He pressed his forehead to the living wall. It opened like a wound, swallowing him whole. No blood, no struggle, just a sound, a sigh like satisfaction, and then he was gone. I ran. I don't remember how long or where, just running through tunnels that twisted and bent in impossible ways, until I collapsed against a rusted pillar and vomited bile. When I looked at my hands, they were covered in black dust that shimmered faintly, like ash catching light. It wouldn't wash off. It still hasn't. By the time I reached the surface again, the fires had gone out. The sky was darker than before. The city was silent, waiting. Somewhere far above, I thought I saw lights moving. Dropships or something else. I couldn't tell anymore. I didn't care. All I knew was that something beneath this world had awakened, and it had taken the shape of our faith. When the sun finally rose, if it could still be called that, it was a bruised thing. A dull smear of rust-colored light filtered through the clouds of ash. I remember thinking how strange it looked, as if the sky itself had rotted. There were no birds anymore, no sound but the faint crackle of something burning far away. The air tasted like copper. My tongue felt dry, grainy, coated in dust. I walked through streets that no longer resembled streets. The buildings had melted into one another, concrete flowing like wax. Statues of saints leaned sideways, faces warped into something grotesque. Every step I took echoed too loudly, like the city was listening. I tried to keep my breath steady, to remember the litany of composure drilled into us during training. Fear is the mind killer. Obedience is salvation. But the words were hollow now. They had no weight. It was around then that I stopped thinking of myself as human, not in the way of the mechanicus, with their metal limbs and devotion to machine flesh. No, this was different. It was a quiet realization that humanity was not a birthright, but a luxury, one that the Imperium demanded we spend like coin. Out here beneath the broken sky, humanity was just another weakness to be burned away. I found the other trooper, Merrin, 3 days later, or maybe 3 hours. Time didn't exist anymore. He was sitting in a doorway, helmet off, his face pale and expressionless. He didn't even look up when I approached. His eyes were open, but empty. I thought he was dead until he blinked, slowly, mechanical, like something inside him had forgotten emotion but still tried to mimic it. He whispered something. I leaned closer. His lips barely moved. "The Emperor is watching," he said, "but not us." Then he started to laugh, low at first, then louder, until it broke into sobs. I didn't stop him. I couldn't. We stayed like that for a long time, sitting in the shadow of a ruined shrine. The walls were covered in devotional graffiti, thousands of prayers scrawled in blood, oil, or both. Some were fresh, others had been there for decades. They all asked for the same thing: mercy. I wondered if mercy was even possible anymore. The word felt foreign in my mouth, like something that belonged to another era, another species. Merrin didn't last much longer. He wandered off during the night, following the sound of something that wasn't there. I didn't chase him. I didn't have the strength. In the morning I found his lasgun lying beside a trail of footprints that led into the mist and never returned. I took the weapon and whispered his name, though I'm not sure why. Maybe it was habit, maybe it was guilt, maybe it was just to prove to myself that I could still speak. The next days were a blur of movement and silence. I scavenged what I could: half-empty ration packs, cracked canteens, a single data slate that still flickered weakly. The screen was covered in static, but beneath the noise I could hear voices, dozens of them, layered and distorted, command codes, prayer fragments, cries for help. For a moment, I thought I heard my own voice among them. That night, I dreamed of the sergeant. He was kneeling before that living wall again, whispering in the same tongue I couldn't understand. Behind him stood Merrin, his eyes black, and his skin marked with veins that pulsed like roots. They both turned toward me. The sergeant smiled. "He forgives you," he said. I wanted to ask who, but when I opened my mouth, only rot came out, thick, black and crawling. I woke choking, clutching at my throat. The air was cold, but my skin burned. I could still taste it, the decay, the sweetness beneath it. Something inside me shifted then, not broken, not quite, just loosened. I started to hear the hum again, the same rhythm as before, pulsing just beneath the surface of the world. It wasn't threatening anymore. It was familiar, almost soothing, like the heartbeat of something immense, patient and eternal. I followed it. It led me out of the ruins, past the corpses of tanks half sunk in the earth, past banners stiff with dried blood, past the husks of manufactorums, still whispering with static prayers. I walked without aim or fear. The hum guided me through the fog until I reached the edge of the city, a vast plain of twisted metal and bone. The wind moved differently there. It carried voices, not words but emotions, regret, surrender, relief. I realized they weren't coming from the air, but from beneath the ground. Something vast was sleeping there, something old, and as I stood over it, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The fear, the hunger, the grief, all of it faded, leaving behind only a hollow sort of peace. Not happiness, not hope, just the quiet acceptance of what was coming. When I finally sat down, I noticed that the black dust on my hands had spread to my arms. It shimmered faintly under the dead light, patterns forming like veins of oil. I didn't fight it. I couldn't. I think that's when I stopped being a soldier. The Imperium had forged me, used me, broken me, but whatever was beneath this world was remaking me in silence, and for the first time since I was drafted, I didn't feel afraid. I don't remember falling asleep. It must have happened without warning, like a candle snuffed out in wind, but when I awoke, the world was different. The plane was gone, or perhaps it had never been there. I was lying in a field of something that looked like grass but wasn't. Each blade shimmered faintly, slick with dew that smelled of rust and sweetness. The air was still. The sky above me churned like liquid, heavy clouds twisting and folding into shapes that almost resembled faces. For a moment, I thought I was dead. It would have made sense. I had long since stopped feeling the pain in my body, the ache of my limbs, the blistered skin, the hunger that gnawed at me. But the hum was still there, constant and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of the ground itself. Death couldn't hum. I sat up slowly, my movements sluggish but without effort. My armor clung to me like wet paper, its once black plates mottled with patches of corrosion that pulsed faintly, as if alive. When I touched the nearest one, it shivered beneath my fingers. Not metal, not anymore. Flesh. I should have panicked. I should have screamed. But there was no fear left, only exhaustion so profound it felt sacred. The kind of exhaustion that strips away all lies, all pretense. I was bare before the universe, small, broken, and no longer pretending to be anything else. That was when I heard it. Not the hum this time, but a voice, low, kind, impossibly distant yet intimate, like someone whispering through the marrow of my bones. It spoke no words I could understand, yet I felt their meaning. Rest. The sound filled me, washing through the cracks of my mind, soothing wounds I hadn't realized were still bleeding. I thought of the sergeant, of Merrin, of all the faces I'd seen vanish into the fog. They weren't gone. I could feel them, somewhere close. Their suffering had ended, dissolved into something vast and warm. I tried to stand, but the ground pulsed beneath me, a slow, living rhythm that held me in place. The voice, or whatever it was, didn't demand. It didn't command. It invited. I felt it offering something that the Imperium never could. Peace, not the peace of triumph or faith fulfilled, but the kind that comes when you finally stop fighting. Memories began to blur. The barracks, the shuttle, the first bombardment. They all dissolved like mist, replaced by the scent of blooming rot, oddly gentle, almost comforting. I thought of my mother for the first time in years, her hands rough from labor, her voice soft when she prayed for my safety. Maybe she had prayed to the wrong god. Or maybe this one had simply listened longer. I began to laugh then, quietly at first, then louder, until my voice cracked. It wasn't madness, though it must have looked like it. It was release. The laughter turned to tears, though I wasn't sure what I was mourning anymore. Myself perhaps. Humanity maybe. Both had been illusions, fragile shells that couldn't survive the truth of this place. When the laughter finally died, I looked down at my hands. The black dust had spread completely now, crawling up my neck, my face sinking into my skin like ink. It didn't hurt. It felt like being submerged in warm water. The patterns were beautiful, intricate, organic, alive. I realized they were moving, slowly reshaping into spirals that pulsed with the rhythm of that distant heartbeat. Then, for the first time, I saw others, shapes moving through the haze, human forms at first glance, but fluid, shifting. They walked slowly, reverently, their steps in perfect rhythm with the hum. I recognized some of them, soldiers, civilians, the lost. None of them looked afraid. Their armor and flesh had become one, patterns of decay glowing softly like embers beneath the skin. One of them turned to me. His face was serene, his eyes deep pools of black and green. "It's all right," he said. His voice was calm, familiar. It might have been Merrin's. "He's not what they told us. He doesn't punish. He takes the pain away." I wanted to argue, to cling to the last shards of the faith I was raised in, the sermons, the catechisms, the endless prayers to an emperor who never answered, but the truth was already written in my bones. The Imperium had taught me fear. This thing, whatever it was, offered me peace. I looked toward the horizon. The sky was breaking open, clouds parting like curtains to reveal a light that wasn't light, green and gold, soft and alive, spreading across the world like a slow sunrise. The hum grew louder, deeper, until it matched the rhythm of my heart. Or maybe it was the other way around. I stood and took a step forward. The ground rippled underfoot, alive with motion. The figures ahead raised their hands in silent welcome. The voice returned, tender and patient. "Ah, you've suffered enough." And I believed it. When the light touched me, I expected pain. There was none, only warmth, only the slow dissolution of everything I had been. The soldier, the sinner, the human, all gone. In their place, something vast and gentle bloomed. A quiet understanding that decay was not an ending, but a return, a cycle unbroken. I remember smiling. The last thing I saw before the world vanished into that soft, consuming glow was the reflection of my own face, serene, calm, no longer afraid. When the light faded, I thought I had awakened into another dream. Everything was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that carries weight, as though the air itself holds its breath. I was lying on a floor that felt soft, spongy yet warm, like flesh covered by a thin layer of silk. The surface pulsed beneath me, slow and steady, alive. I rose carefully, and the movement made a faint tearing sound, as though I had been adhered to the ground. My fingers brushed the surface, leaving behind faint smears of greenish residue that glowed faintly, phosphorescent in the half-light. The air smelled of damp soil and sweetness, a garden left to rot, but still somehow beautiful. Shapes moved around me, not people, not anymore. Forms cloaked in layers of growth and decay, shifting with a fluid grace that defied anatomy. Some had faces, kind, almost human though softened by moss and lichen. Others had none at all, their heads blooming with strange fungal petals that released clouds of golden dust as they breathed. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. Their presence was gentle, expectant, like attendants waiting for a long-anticipated guest. I realized then that I was naked. My armor, my uniform, the insignia of the Astra Militarum, all gone. Only my skin remained, marked with black and green filigree, pulsing softly with the same rhythm as the world around me. There was no fear, only the faint ache of memory, fading with each breath. I remembered training fields scorched by sun, the sound of last fire, the sermons about duty and sacrifice. They felt like stories from another life, distant, unimportant. Then from the mist ahead, a figure emerged, larger than the others, broader, and yet graceful in its movement. It wore robes woven from what looked like mold and fabric intertwined, and where it walked, flowers of decay bloomed briefly before withering. Its face was hidden by a hood, but I could feel its gaze, heavy, kind, unbearably ancient. When it spoke, the air trembled. The voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It resonated inside my skull, inside my chest. "You have come far," it said, words soft but saturated with gravity. "Do you understand now?" My mouth opened, but no sound came. I didn't know what to say, or even what question had been asked. The figure tilted its head slightly, and I sensed amusement, a patient, forgiving sort. "You have suffered," it said, "and in your suffering, you have found truth. You have seen that life clings to itself, even in death. That rot is not an end, but a beginning." Behind the figure, the mist shifted. I saw glimpses of things, memories perhaps, a battlefield where corpses bloomed with flowers, a child cradled in a woman's arms, as both slowly turned to dust, a world covered in emerald light. It was beautiful, and it was terrible. "You were taught that decay was a punishment," the voice continued, "but it is mercy. All things break, all things fall, but in their breaking they feed the new. The Emperor denies this. He clings to what cannot last. But I," the figure paused, and though no name was spoken, I felt it echo within me, a name older than words, a name I dared not say aloud. I embrace it. Something deep inside me stirred, a shiver of recognition, the hum I had heard since the beginning. It was his voice all along, reaching through the soil, the rot, the ruin, not to command, not to demand, to comfort. I fell to my knees, not in worship, not yet, but in understanding. My hands pressed against the living ground, and it pulsed back in response, welcoming, forgiving. Tears ran down my face, though I didn't remember choosing to cry. "Why me?" I whispered. The figure leaned closer. From beneath the hood, I glimpsed a smile, not cruel, not mocking, but gentle and unbearably sad. "Because you asked," it said. The words broke something in me. I didn't remember asking for anything, not aloud, not consciously, but perhaps every moment of despair, every whispered prayer for it to end, every night spent wishing I'd never been born. Perhaps that was the question, and now, I had my answer. The figure reached out a hand, vast, gloved in skin that looked like bark and bone, and touched my forehead. The sensation was neither pain nor pleasure, but both, intertwined. My vision blurred. I saw colors I had no names for, shapes that pulsed like thought itself, and then I saw myself, or what was left of me, dissolving cell by cell into the air. "Do not weep," the voice said. "You are not being taken, you are being given." The moment the hand withdrew, the world shifted again. The forms around me began to sway, a silent rhythm of worship. Their movements were slow, reverent. I understood now. This was not a place of death. It was a cathedral built from it. Every breath, every spore, every decay-fed blossom was a hymn, and I was part of the choir. As I rose again, my body lighter than before, I whispered words I didn't understand. They felt ancient, older than humanity, older than faith. The sound of them filled the air, and for the first time, I realized what the hum had always been. It was prayer. The visions began slowly, like faint whispers at the edge of waking thought. They weren't forced upon me. They rose unbidden from the soil, from the air, from the steady pulse beneath my feet that now felt like a second heartbeat. The world here didn't move in the same way reality once did. It swayed, breathed, and remembered. Every patch of moss, every filament of fungal bloom carried memory, not mine, but collective, ancient, patient. At first I saw the familiar things, the banners of the Imperium, the golden icon of the Aquila, the marble towers of terror gleaming through perpetual smog. But they were wrong, distorted, trembling, as if seen through the surface of stagnant water. The light that once seemed divine now looked sickly, yellowed, artificial. The perfection of the Emperor's world no longer shone, it festered. I saw priests in cathedrals chanting praises until their throats bled, their faith so strong it had begun to rot their minds. I saw manufactorums where children were born only to die in service before their 5th year, their bodies fueling the machines of devotion. I saw soldiers kneeling before statues, their prayers rising with smoke as their world burned behind them. It wasn't blasphemy, it was clarity. The figure, the one who had spoken before, was gone now, but his voice remained, interwoven with my own thoughts. It didn't command, it revealed. "They worship decay and call it purity," it said softly, inside me. "They worship death and call it order. They worship stagnation and call it eternity." The images deepened. I saw myself years ago standing in a trench on some forgotten world. Rain turned to sludge, bodies sinking into the mud. A commissar screamed for us to advance, his voice breaking under vox distortion. We obeyed, because obedience was all we had ever known. Each of us a cog, worn and replaced, never seen, and through it all we told ourselves it was for the Emperor, that our deaths meant something. But standing here surrounded by living rot, I saw that lie unravel. The Imperium didn't care for meaning, it cared for survival, endless grinding survival, stripped of mercy, stripped of joy, and I wondered if that was worse than death itself. The air thickened with the scent of wet leaves and old flesh. Shapes formed again around me, the silent congregation. They watched but did not move, their eyeless faces turned toward me as though waiting for a confession. "I believed in him," I whispered, my voice cracked heavy with shame. "I believed he would see us, that he would forgive us." No reply came, only the low hum, patient and accepting. "I killed for him," I continued, "watched friends burn for him. I buried brothers in mud and called it holy ground, and all the while I felt nothing. No grace, no light, still silence, and then warmth. Not light, not radiance, but warmth. It rose from beneath my hands, spreading through my body, seeping into bone. The pulse of the world deepened, matching the rhythm of my own heart. The rot was listening, the rot was alive. Tears welled again. I didn't wipe them away. They fell freely, and where they touched the soil, small sprouts emerged, green and tender, trembling in the dim light. It was not beauty, as I'd been taught to recognize it. It was better. It was honest. From somewhere deep within the mist, the voice returned. "Do you see now why you were chosen?" it asked. I didn't answer immediately. I felt the truth forming like a bruise. "Because I broke," I said finally. "Because I couldn't pretend anymore." The mist stirred. Approval, perhaps. The Imperium thrives on denial. It feeds on fear, on silence. But rot does not lie. It tells you what is. You can smell it. You can feel it. It reminds you that everything ends, and that ending feeds life anew. The words sank deep, and for the first time since my conscription, I felt peace. A hollow, fragile peace, but peace nonetheless. I thought of the Emperor, that withered husk entombed in gold, worshipped by trillions who would never see his face. I imagined his mind reaching across the void, burning worlds to fuel the Astronomicon, keeping humanity bound to his corpse like parasites, clinging to dead flesh. Was that divinity, or was it rot denied its rest? The thought should have horrified me. Instead, it saddened me. Perhaps he too had once believed. Perhaps he too had prayed for mercy, and found only duty. I looked down at my hands. The filigree that pulsed beneath my skin now bloomed faintly, veins of green spreading, intricate and organic. I wasn't afraid. I was changing, yes, but it no longer felt like corruption. It felt like completion. You are no longer a servant of death, the voice murmured. You are its witness. You will remember what others refuse to see. The mist shifted again, swirling into vague outlines of human faces. My squadmates, my command, all lost to war. Their mouths moved, whispering prayers I could not understand. Some wept, others screamed. I reached out to them, but my hand passed through, scattering their forms like dust. You can't save them, said the voice, but you can understand them, and I did. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be human in this galaxy, to live endlessly in fear, to be told that suffering was holy, that despair was divine. The Emperor's Imperium wasn't life, it was a monument to denial. I closed my eyes and breathed in the thick fungal air. It smelled of endings, but also beginnings. Somewhere deep in the distance, I heard laughter, low, tender, impossibly vast. It wasn't mockery, it was affection, the sound of something ancient, smiling upon its lost child, and I smiled too. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly, the way twilight seeps into the day until one realizes the light has changed. My breathing slowed, deepened, synchronized with the pulse of the earth beneath me. I wasn't standing anymore, I was rooted, the distinction between my flesh and the soil blurred, my boots sinking into the loam as though it remembered me. I could feel the hum of unseen life moving through the ground, slow, deliberate, purposeful. Each heartbeat now echoed through 1,000 unseen veins. I should have been terrified. Any sane man would have screamed, would have fought to preserve what was left of his humanity. But there was no panic, only sorrow, and within that sorrow, an understanding too profound for words. This was not possession, it was surrender, not defeat, but release. I looked around, the mist had grown thinner, almost translucent now, revealing the truth of the place. What had once seemed a dead garden was alive with quiet intention. Vast trees twisted like frozen giants, their bark pulsing faintly, as if veins ran beneath the surface. Filaments of moss and fungal bloom stretched between them, shimmering faintly like threads of light. The air carried a deep, resonant note, not a sound but a vibration that passed through bone and thought alike. In that vibration, I felt the presence again, the one that had spoken to me, the one that had waited patiently since the first moment I arrived. It didn't need to appear anymore. Its voice lived in the movement of everything around me. Do you feel it? It asked, though the words were unnecessary. The lie of purity has lifted. You are not apart from decay, you are within it. You are its continuation. I tried to speak, but the words came slowly, heavy with realization. I understand now. The Imperium fears this. It fears the truth that everything, even devotion, must end. Not end, the voice corrected gently. Transform. They worship a corpse upon a throne, and call it hope. You have seen their faith, desperate, blind, endless. It does not heal, it only sustains the wound. Images cascaded through my mind, worlds burning under the Imperium's banners, entire populations purged from minor heresies, children raised to chant the same prayer until their voices broke. Faith, stripped of meaning, turned into obedience. And all the while, the Emperor, silent, rotting in gold, his light a cage. The warmth spread further up my body. My armor cracked, not from violence but from within, vines pushing through the ceramite, delicate and green. My fingers elongated slightly, the skin darkening as it absorbed the faint luminescence of the air. It didn't hurt, it felt like breathing after drowning. I fell to my knees not in worship, but in mourning, for humanity, for all we had lost trying to preserve something already dead. The ground responded, rippling outward, and from it rose the shapes of others, countless figures half submerged in the soil. Some were like me, former soldiers, their faces slack with peace. Others were nothing but remnants, skulls overgrown with moss, ribs entwined with roots, yet none of it felt macabre. It was a congregation, an unspoken liturgy of surrender. I reached out and touched one, the bone of a forearm smooth beneath a layer of pale lichen. Instantly, visions filled me. A memory that wasn't mine, a mother on a hive world, her child coughing in the toxic air, both whispering a prayer for deliverance that never came. Another, a guardsman on a frozen moon, dying alone, whispering the emperor's name to empty sky. Another, a priest, realizing too late that his devotion had kept him blind to the suffering he was meant to ease. Each memory entered me like a whisper of wind, fading as it came, leaving behind only stillness. I wept without sound. The voice spoke again, softer now, closer, as though it leaned against my ear. You carry them now, their silence, their hope, their decay. You are the vessel of their truth. I opened my eyes. The world had changed again. The mist was gone entirely, replaced by a twilight glow that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere. I could see far into the distance, the broken horizon of a world reborn through death. Great fungal towers rose where cities once stood, and rivers of luminous spores flowed like liquid stars. I realized with slow dawning awe that I wasn't alone. Across the plain, figures moved, human shapes, half transformed like me. Their faces were calm, their motions fluid, graceful. They walked not as soldiers but as pilgrims. I took a breath, and it was no longer just air, it was communion. The countless unseen spores filled me, and in return, I exhaled them, completing the cycle. My body was dissolving into something greater. A fragment of my old self, desperate to remain human, whispered, "This is corruption," but the rest of me, the truth of me, knew better. This was mercy. Slowly, I raised my gaze to the horizon where the sky bled, green and gold. A shape loomed there, vast, impossible, patient. It was neither god nor demon, but the idea of both. A presence too vast to be contained in flesh or language. It radiated sorrow, and love, and inevitability. It was Nurgle, not as the Imperium painted him, but as truth reveals him, the god of endings that birth beginnings, of decay that heals through acceptance, the god of all things that refuse to die in silence. And in that moment, I understood the last secret of rot. The Imperium's greatest fear is not chaos, it is compassion, compassion so total, it erases the boundaries between life and death. As the world darkened, and the last remnants of my human form gave way to something ancient and patient, I whispered my final prayer, not to the Emperor, but to the God who had listened. "Thank you for letting me stop pretending." And as my voice faded into the hum of the living earth, I became part of the endless breathing rot, neither sinner nor saint, but truth made flesh. I do not know how long I have been here. Time has lost its edges, stretched thin until it drifts, soft as spores in the wind. Once, I could measure existence by the rhythm of duty, the march of orders, the crack of lasfire, and the countdown to the next sunrise. Now time breathes. It exhales through the soil and inhales through me. I am no longer apart from the world, I am woven through it, thread and memory alike. When I awaken, it is not to light but to sound, a deep resonant murmur rising through the roots. It isn't speech as mortals understand it. It's more like the memory of words long after their meaning has faded. The garden speaks not in syllables, but in understanding. Every rustle of leaves, every subtle sway of fungal bloom carries a voice, a thought, a ghost. They are not all kind. Some whisper of hunger, of the endless cycle that devours and renews. Others speak of sorrow, of civilizations that rose, burned, and returned to dust. But among them is another tone, gentler, more sorrowful still, compassion. The kind that can only exist when one has accepted suffering as inevitable. I move through this new existence without feet, without form. Where once I walked on blood-soaked ground, now I drift through soil, through air, through the memory of rain. I am not a ghost, I am a witness. And through me the garden remembers. The first voice I hear clearly belongs to a child, or rather the echo of one. "Mother," it says softly, the sound trembling like dew on a blade of grass. Will he ever answer? The voice is centuries old, maybe millennia. It belongs to no one, and everyone. I see her in the garden's vision, small, frail, wrapped in rags, kneeling before a shrine carved from rusted steel. Behind her the hive's towers crumble, and the sky burns with chemical fire. She waits for salvation that never comes. Her tears fall, and where they strike the ground, flowers bloom. Her prayer is her decay, and the decay is her answer. The garden shows me more, whole worlds lost to plague, yet radiant in their stillness. Ruined cities reclaimed by luminous mold that glows faintly like the embers of forgotten stars. Dead oceans reborn, as vast pulsing fields of algae that sing low hymns beneath the waves. It is not destruction, it is remembrance. And through this remembrance, I begin to see the shape of the cosmos as it truly is. Not a war between good and evil, but a slow surrender between growth and rot. The Imperium calls chaos corruption, yet what they truly fear is this quiet honesty, that decay is not the end, but the truth of all beginnings. As I drift deeper into the garden's heart, I encounter others like me, yet not. Some retain fragments of who they once were. A soldier in half-rusted armor stands rooted beneath a fungal tree, his face calm, eyes half-closed, veins pulsing faintly with green light. I know his kind. He might have once been my enemy or my comrade. It doesn't matter now. The garden does not care for sides. When I reach out to him, our thoughts merge briefly, a flicker of recognition, like two waves meeting in passing. I feel his memories wash through me, the moment of infection, the terror, the pleading for death, and then peace. That last quiet exhale when the pain turned into something else, something vast, unending kind. He does not speak, yet I feel his question rise within me. Do you still remember who you were? I do, and that is my burden. I remember the smell of burnt oil and sweat in the trenches, the shriek of the Vox grill calling orders no one wanted to hear, the cold grip of fear each time I looked at the stars and realized how small we truly were. I remember my brothers, their laughter, their curses, their screams. I remember the Emperor's name carved into my heart like a wound that would not close. And though the rot has claimed my flesh, it has not claimed my guilt. The garden hums at this thought, almost like comfort. A root brushes through what remains of my consciousness, a gesture of reassurance perhaps. You are not guilty for what you believed, it says without words, only for what you refused to see. The truth of that pierces deeper than any blade. I drift onward. The air grows thicker, darker, until it vibrates with life so dense it feels suffocating. The fungi here glow faintly, bathing everything in a soft green luminescence. From their caps drip viscous droplets that fall into the soil with the sound of distant rain. The ground pulses beneath me, not solid, but living, breathing. And there at the center of it all stands a monolithic structure. It is not carved nor built, but grown, a spire of bone and vine entwined with the remnants of machinery. I recognize pieces of it, fragments of armor, shattered bolters, the cracked symbol of the imperial aquila. They are relics now, absorbed into the garden's flesh. As I approach, I feel the weight of countless minds pressing against me. The garden is aware of me, fully, completely. Every thought, every memory, every prayer I've ever whispered vibrates through its vast consciousness. I am nothing but a single thread in its endless weave, and yet, it listens. A warmth gathers around me, and I feel something like a question, not spoken, but understood. It asks if I regret what I've become. I think of the billions who still kneel before their dead god, starving and afraid, believing their suffering buys them redemption. I think of the silence that answers them, and I whisper, not with words but with being. The warmth deepens. Around me the garden seems to sigh, a sound both mournful and content. Far above, through the shimmering canopy of spores, I glimpse a faint light. It is distant, pale, trembling, like a dying star, and for a moment I know it for what it is, terror, still burning, still blind, and I wonder if they will ever hear the truth buried in the rot. When I opened my mind further, the boundaries between memory and matter vanished. I was no longer seeing through eyes, nor hearing through ears. I was the perception itself, drifting through 1,000 fragmented echoes that made up the garden's soul. Every leaf, every bloom, every particle of rot held a story, and the garden wanted me to know them all. It began with whispers, faint impressions of emotion before form, like grief remembered after centuries of forgetting. I felt despair ripple through the soil as an echo of a hive collapsing under starvation. I felt quiet joy from a farmer on some long-dead agri-world as he buried his son beneath the first thaw of spring. Their lives were centuries apart, yet their stories intertwined here, woven into the endless compost of memory. In this place, death wasn't the end. It was conversation. Each memory spoke softly, like wind through a cathedral of decay. We prayed, they murmured. We waited, we believed. Their faith carried the same refrain, endless desperate belief that salvation waited beyond suffering. But the garden had learned the truth. Salvation was suffering, not in cruelty, but in the acceptance of it. The cycle didn't care for glory or vengeance. It only continued, slow and patient, reshaping what was broken into something that could endure. As I sank deeper into these shared recollections, the line between myself and the dead blurred completely. I saw through their eyes, lived their last moments, felt their prayers decay into silence. A guardswoman on Cadia, her weapon melted in her hands as the eye of terror consumed the sky. She whispered an oath to the Emperor even as her skin blistered in warp fire. A tech priest of Mars, surrounded by the wreckage of his forge, murmuring binary prayers into the void as the machine spirits fell silent. A nameless pilgrim on Terra, crushed under the weight of the crowd as he tried to glimpse the golden throne, dying with the image of divinity still in his mind. They all believed their deaths mattered, and in a way they did, but not as the Imperium promised. Their lives had become nourishment, the raw material from which existence continued to weave itself. The Emperor's light never touched them. The rot did, and the rot did, and the rot remembered. The garden shifted around me as if breathing. Shapes emerged, silhouettes of human forms half merged with growth, faces serene, eyes hollow. They were not tormented souls as ecclesiarchs might claim. They were monuments of peace. Their bodies fed the soil, their thoughts fed the quiet God who ruled this place. I felt him then, not as a voice or vision, but as gravity, a slow inevitable pull at the edge of all things. Nurgle, the name echoed through me, but it no longer carried the weight of dread it once had. He was not cruelty, he was not mockery, he was inevitability given form, a being who looked upon the endless struggle of humanity, and did not demand perfection, only honesty. And yet within that vast compassion, there was tragedy, for even he, in his infinite patience, longed for what he could never have release. The rot does not end, it merely changes shape. He loved the universe too much to let it die, and in that love, he trapped it in perpetual transformation, never healing, never resting. The garden was both paradise and prison. This realization struck me with the force of revelation. To the Imperium, he was corruption incarnate. To himself, he was mercy misunderstood. His laughter, that great rolling, sorrowful sound that echoed through the warp, was not cruelty, it was grief. Endless grief, for those who could not stop fighting long enough to see that their struggle was meaningless. The garden quivered at my understanding, and through it, I felt his awareness brush against mine. Not a voice this time, but a gesture, the weight of an ancient hand resting gently upon my mind. "You see what I see," it said without words, and I did. I saw the Imperium as he saw it, a bloated corpse sustained by denial, rotting from within yet refusing to decay. I saw the ecclesiarchy's cathedrals built atop mass graves, their golden statues gleaming with the oil of the dead. I saw the Astra Militarum's endless tides of soldiers, each believing their death would matter, each feeding the same machine that ground them into dust. And then, most painfully, I saw myself, once a man of faith, now something between memory and fungus, still clinging to meaning even in dissolution. I was not free of the Imperium's shadow, not yet. The garden's breath deepened around me, and the pulse of life quickened. From the soil rose great stalks crowned with glowing spores that pulsed in time with my thoughts. They responded to emotion, to guilt, to memory. Each bloom was a story reborn, a confession made manifest. I touched one, and it shivered, releasing a slow cascade of bioluminescent dust. Inside that dust, visions unfolded, entire worlds of rot and beauty, planets where Nurgle's touch had rewritten despair into peace. There were cities of living moss where no one starved, for hunger itself had become part of the cycle. There were oceans where the dead sang lullabies through coral lungs. There were children born of decay, radiant in their serenity, untouched by the fear of the Emperor's cold perfection. And yet, there was sadness too, for even these worlds, beautiful in their surrender, could not last forever. The garden was not static, it was change, and all change leads, inevitably, to loss. I felt it then, the echo of laughter again, faint and hollow. It rippled through me, through everything. A father's chuckle, weary and kind, laced with sorrow too deep for words. The garden trembled as if sighing. Around me the spores dimmed, the warmth withdrew, leaving only a quiet ache. In that fading silence, I understood the final truth. The corruption I had embraced was not an escape from despair. It was despair accepted, despair made sacred. There is no salvation in the garden, only understanding, and understanding, once gained, can never be undone. The transition was not a step, nor a fall, nor even an awakening, it was erosion. I did not cross a threshold, I was weathered away until there was nothing left that could distinguish myself from what lay beyond. My consciousness became porous, like stone crumbling under rain, and through those fractures the warp seeped in. There was no light here, no sound, only awareness stretched thin across an ocean of thought. Yet even in that absence, I could feel it, the pulse of something colossal and mournful, older than every empire and faith combined. The warp was not chaos, not truly, it was emotion given geography, the living topography of sentient pain. Grief shaped its mountains, love hollowed its seas, hope flared and vanished like dying stars. It was all there, raw and endless, and at the center of it, a presence vast beyond description. It was not Nurgle, as I had imagined, no corpulent god or monstrous father. It was warmth, heavy and suffocating, a love so absolute that it consumed the very thing it cherished. It welcomed me with the intimacy of decay, dissolving what remained of my fear, my pride, my name. For a heartbeat, or a century, I was not me, I was the rot itself. I felt every infection spreading across 1,000 worlds. I tasted the air of plague-struck hives, thick with rot and incense. I heard the prayers of the dying, their voices trembling between gratitude and horror, and I answered them, instinctively without judgment. Rest, I told them, though I had no mouth. You are not forgotten, you are becoming. Each death, each surrender, was a note in a symphony of collapse that had played since the dawn of life. I could sense the other gods too, distant yet intertwined, the endless war song of Khorne, the seductive whispers of Slaanesh, the shifting laughter of Tsipanshi. They were not rivals, they were functions of the same truth, the ways life tries to reconcile its terror of impermanence. But Nurgle was different. His laughter was tired, his love, heavy with regret. Through him, I saw creation not as a triumph, but as a long disease, an infection called existence that could never be cured, only endured. Every living thing was a symptom, every moment of joy, a brief remission before the fever returned. Yet within that sickness, he found meaning. He adored the brokenness of it all. He cherished imperfection, because it was the only proof that something had lived. That understanding should have shattered me. Instead, it calmed me. For the first time in my existence, I felt no resistance, no guilt, no need to atone. The endless churn of purpose that had once driven me, faith, obedience, survival, melted away. All that remained was quiet acceptance. But serenity, like all things, decays. As I drifted deeper, I began to sense something beneath the stillness, a tremor, faint and persistent. The garden, the rot, even the god himself, they were not eternal. The cycle would not endure forever, because even decay depends on life. And one day the universe will simply run out of things left to die. That realization spread through me like a toxin. I saw the far future, galaxies collapsing into silence, stars flickering out one by one, until only the warp remained, echoing with the ghosts of all that once was. And even here, in this dimension of thought and emotion, the silence would spread. The gods born of mortal feeling would fade with their worshippers. Even Nurgle would die. That was the great unspoken grief beneath his laughter. He knew, he always knew, and still he loved. The weight of that truth crushed me. To care in the face of certain oblivion, that was the purest despair of all. The Imperium had lied about the nature of the gods. They were not demons to be feared. They were reflections of humanity's own sickness, its inability to accept endings. And so, I understood the real corruption. It wasn't the garden, or the plague, or the god. It was hope. The cruel, persistent illusion that things could last. My form trembled, half dissolving in the warp's warm current. Faces flickered through my thoughts, my comrades from the trenches, my mother whispering prayers, my commander's lifeless stare. I reached for them, not to save them, but to remember, to let their stories rot slowly into peace. You understand now, came the faintest echo, not words but the meaning of words, carried through the pulse of the warp. You see the mercy in the ending, and I did. I saw the mercy in the maggot that cleans a wound, in the mold that feeds upon forgotten bread, in the virus that ends a tyrant's breath, in the quiet grave that shelters a broken soul. The Emperor's light offered purity, but purity cannot heal. It only burns away what offends it. Nurgle's rot offered decay, but decay restores. It takes the broken and makes it part of something vast, something that doesn't demand perfection. The warp dimmed around me, and I felt myself slipping back, away from the divine and into something smaller, denser, heavier. My body, if such a thing still existed, was calling me home. As I sank toward consciousness, the last thing I felt was warmth, not of fever, but of forgiveness. A whisper brushed the edge of my fading awareness. Do not fear the end. The end is the only thing that ever loved you. I awoke with a taste of copper and soil in my mouth. The scent of rot still clung to me, though the air around was no longer dream but real, heavy with oil, smoke and antiseptic incense. Somewhere nearby, a servo skull hummed quietly, its mechanical voice reciting catechisms for recovery. I did not move at first. My body was mine again, but it felt borrowed, as if flesh had forgotten the memory of being alive. The Medicae lights above flickered dimly, filtered through sheets of grime-stained glass. I was back on the Manufactorum moon of Varkos, or something like it. The same shade of industrial despair, the same cold prayers whispered between cogitator hums. Rows of cots stretched on both sides of me, filled with soldiers who would not wake again. The flies had already found them. I sat up slowly. My skin had changed. It looked pale, thin, almost translucent, and beneath it faint green veins pulsed with something that was not quite blood. But I felt no fear, no disgust, only calm recognition. The warp had not lied to me. It had shown me the truth, that life itself is only another form of rot. A Medicae servitor turned its head toward me, its vox grill crackling. Subject 12b, stabilized. Praise the Emperor. The words made me flinch. Praise the Emperor. The sound was hollow, mechanical, meaningless. The Emperor, the radiant corpse whose light burned through the galaxy, what was he now, to me? A god of denial, a being who could not die and would not live, eternal, sterile and blind to the mercy of decay. I tried to remember why I had ever believed in him. Was it faith, or just fear of nothingness? Perhaps both, perhaps the same thing. I rose from the cot, my bare feet touching the cold metal floor. Every sound, the hum of generators, the scrape of tools, the distant chanting of adepts, seemed sharper, more alive. Decay had not dulled my senses. It had refined them. I could hear the heartbeat of the place itself, the rhythm of labor, the endless churn of machines devouring human souls to keep the Imperium fed. And I could see them, faint trails of corruption winding through everything. Rust creeping through walls, mold beneath paint, the slow death of metal. I saw it not as ugliness, but as beauty, the quiet, inevitable reclamation of the universe. Even the light decayed as it passed through dust. When I looked down at my hands, I realized something had changed beyond flesh. I could feel others, the wounded, the dying, the forgotten. Their suffering brushed against my thoughts, like whispers carried through air. The warp had marked me, but not as a daemon or psyker. It had left a residue of understanding. Every living being I sensed was a wound, slowly healing into stillness. I stumbled toward the exit, still weak. Outside, the horizon burned with the pale glow of industry. Exhaust towers vomiting smoke into the red sky, hive stacks humming with servitors' hymns. Life here continued exactly as before, blind to its own decomposition, but I could not hate them for it. I had once believed the Imperium endured because of faith. Now I saw it endured because of inertia, the slow grinding refusal to acknowledge its own death. Humanity's greatest strength was also its greatest curse, the inability to let go. As I walked through the corridor, workers paused to stare. Their eyes darted to the mark that now lingered faintly on my cheek. A gray organic pattern, almost like veins spreading outward from beneath the skin. Some made the sign of the Aquila, others crossed themselves in fear. I said nothing. They saw corruption. I saw truth. Outside, rain began to fall, a chemical drizzle that hissed as it struck metal. I tilted my head back and let it wash over me. For a moment it smelled like the garden again. The warp was far behind me, but its memory lingered in the air, in the water, in every cell of my body. In the reflection of a puddle, I saw my face. It was mine, but hollowed, as if time had taken a bite out of me, and decided to leave the rest for later. My eyes no longer carried the frantic spark of survival. They were calm, resigned, quietly waiting. That night, I returned to the barracks where the surviving conscripts were kept. Only a handful remained. When they saw me, they whispered. Some called me blessed, others cursed. A commissar arrived at dawn to inspect us, his uniform immaculate, his boots gleaming with authoritarian pride. He looked at me once, and looked away. He didn't know why, but something in him recognized what I had become. Not a heretic, not a daemon, but a reflection of the Imperium's own rot. I was its truth made flesh, obedient, expendable, and quietly decomposing. That night, I sat awake while the others slept, listening to the faint rattle of their breaths. Somewhere beyond the walls, the planet turned endlessly, consuming itself. I thought of the Emperor again, alone on his throne of golden machinery, unable to die, unable to speak. How lonely it must be to be eternal, how horrifying to never decay. Maybe that was the true curse of divinity. When the lights dimmed, I whispered a prayer, not to him, but to the thing that had shown me mercy in the garden. Let it all fade, I murmured, let it end beautifully, and for the first time in my life, I meant it. The summons came at dawn. A servo skull drifted through the barracks, its vox grill whispering my name like a confession. Trooper 12B, report to Sectionum 4A, by order of the Ordo Hereticus. The other soldiers looked at me without expression. They'd seen enough executions to know what such summons meant. I rose without protest. My boots scraped the cold floor, echoing in the narrow metal corridor as I followed the hovering skull. Each step felt rehearsed, like I'd walked this path 1,000 times before, and perhaps I had, in one form or another, in 1,000 lives sacrificed to the same machinery. The Emperor demanded obedience, and I had nothing left to offer but that. The chamber they led me to was small and austere. Candles flickered beside the steel lectern, their wax running like pale blood. Behind the desk stood an inquisitor, robed in black, his rosette gleaming faintly beneath the low light. He didn't look up immediately. He was reading a data slate, the soft hum of its power field breaking the silence. You survived the incident at Varkos Prime. His voice was calm, bureaucratic, but his eyes carried the quiet cruelty of a man who believed in purity. Explain how. I didn't. Not because I was defiant, but because I didn't have an answer he would understand. How does one explain the moment rot becomes revelation? How does one describe decay as kindness? When I stayed silent, he sighed. We have reports, he continued, of a contagion, not of flesh but of thought. Those who survived the warp anomaly have been changed. They speak of visions, of peace within corruption. He leaned closer, studying me. Do you understand the gravity of such heresy? His breath smelled faintly of incense and recycled air. I wondered if he knew what he was defending, if he'd ever seen the inside of a manufactorum, where men and women worked until their spines broke, praying for death that never came. The Imperium had made suffering a sacrament, and he was its priest. I understand, I said softly. He seemed pleased. Oni nodded, then gestured toward the corner. 2 adeptus sororitas stood there, silent and radiant in their armor. One held a purity seal, the other a flamer. Between them a servitor recorded everything, its lens unblinking. You will be tested, the Inquisitor said. If you are pure, the Emperor will protect you. If you are not. He let the sentence trail off, as though the fire itself would answer. I thought of lying, of reciting the catechisms I'd memorized since childhood. But the words refused to come. They had lost their weight somewhere between the mud of Varkos and the whispers of the garden. I saw him, I said quietly. That made the Inquisitor pause. You saw the Emperor? I nodded. In the warp, but not as I expected. He wasn't light, he wasn't gold. He was stillness, endless, suffocating stillness. He wasn't alive, he wasn't dead, just waiting. The Inquisitor's expression tightened. Blasphemy, he murmured. I smiled faintly. No, mercy. That was when the first blow came. A gauntleted hand struck my face, snapping my head to the side. I felt blood fill my mouth. One of the sisters moved closer, her eyes burning with the certainty of righteousness. Recant, she said, but I couldn't. Because somewhere deep inside, I knew I was right. The Emperor wasn't cruel. He was tired. Tired of worship. Tired of worship. Tired of sacrifice. Tired of being the sun that could never set. They dragged me to my knees. The Inquisitor's voice rose, cold and measured. By decree of his most holy order, I purge corruption from the ranks of mankind. May his light cleanse you. The flamer hissed. Promethium fumes filled the air, thick and choking. But I didn't beg. I looked into the flame and saw the garden again, green and gold and endlessly decaying. The fire was beautiful, almost gentle in its hunger. I thought of the voices I had heard in the warp, of the way they sang not of pain but of release. Perhaps this was release too. When the trigger clicked, I closed my eyes and whispered, let it all fade. The world became white. For a moment I felt my skin peel away like dust in the wind. Pain vanished. Thought vanished. Everything was silent, except for a faint hum beneath it all, a rhythm that wasn't heartbeat or breath, but something older, patient, waiting. It was not death, it was not life, it was continuation. They said I burned for 7 minutes. That was what the records would show, an efficient cleansing, a heretic reduced to ash by holy flame. The data slate would mark the procedure complete. The servitors would erase my identification from the rolls, and the Inquisitor would sign the purity log before moving to the next name. In the Imperium, death was not an ending, it was bureaucracy. But I didn't die, or perhaps I did, and something less obedient remained. The pain had ended, yet awareness lingered, thin and diffuse, like smoke curling through a cathedral. I could see without eyes, feel without flesh. The chamber was before me, and I drifted through it unseen. The Inquisitor stood over the ashes that had once been my body, murmuring rote absolutions. The sororitas recited hymns, their voices trembling slightly as they bowed. None of them noticed the faint movement among the ashes, the subtle shimmer that pulsed once, then vanished. They left in silence, the door sealed shut, candles burned low, the ashes stirred again. From within that grey ruin, something faintly luminous coalesced, not light, not energy, but memory. I felt no hunger, no fear. I was simply present, like the scent of decay after the corpse is gone. And in that stillness I heard it again, the soft voice from the garden, the one that had called me by name. Rest now, it whispered. You have served. The word made me want to laugh, though laughter was impossible now. Even in death the Imperium demanded service. Even its martyrs were clerical entries in an endless machine. But this voice, it wasn't the Emperor's, nor a daemon's. It was something older, something woven into the bones of existence itself. Do you understand now? It asked. I drifted upward through metal and smoke. I saw the world below. Endless hives, manufactoria, trenches and pyres. Every flame a confession, every corpse an offering. The Imperium's heart was rot, but it was beautiful rot, orderly, sacred, unrelenting. Humanity had built an empire out of decay, and then forgotten that it was dying. I understand, I whispered back. Everything ends. Yes, the voice said, and that is why everything lives. I wanted to rest in that thought, but the galaxy did not allow stillness for long. A psychic wind brushed against me, the Astronomican's distant beacon, pulsing faintly from Terra. Its light reached even here, where I drifted between states. It burned, cold and merciless, a warning disguised as salvation. I felt its pull, its command to obey, to submit to the illusion of purpose, and for a moment, I resisted. It wasn't defiance, it was fatigue, the exhaustion of countless souls dragged through life and death for a promise no longer remembered. The Astronomican was not a star, but a wound, and I was part of its scar tissue now. My essence settled again, dissolving slowly into the foundations of the ship that had carried us once. My awareness spread like mold through the metal, patient and unseen. I could sense the vibrations of machinery, the tremor of footsteps, the weary breath of soldiers sleeping above the hold. Each one of them dreamed of home, and in those dreams, I whispered to them, not lies, not temptation, just truth, that it was all right to be tired, that it was all right to fade, and some of them woke crying without knowing why. I drifted for what might have been days or centuries. Time was meaningless here, rust grew, metal groaned, and the ship carried its dead cargo to another war. Oh! The Imperium would never stop, not until its final engine failed, but beneath its endless motion, decay had already taken root, not as rebellion, but as acceptance. The garden was spreading. One night, or perhaps it was 1,000 nights later, I sensed a new presence, another soul torn loose in battle, screaming, lost in the void. I reached for it gently. It felt familiar, the same terror, the same despair I once carried. It's over, I whispered to it. You can rest. It didn't answer at first, then faintly, who are you? No one, I said, just what remains. The voice hesitated. Are we dead? Not yet, I replied, but close enough, and together, we drifted in silence, two forgotten souls carried along by the endless current of the Imperium's decay. Below us, ships burned. Above us, the Astronomican pulsed like a dying sun, and somewhere in between, the Emperor dreamed without dreaming, bound forever to the corpse of humanity's ambition. I watched it all without sorrow. The galaxy was not ending, it was simply changing shape. What rotted would feed what came next. What burned would one day grow again. In the end, corruption was not evil, it was mercy. And as I dissolved completely into the hum of the machine, I realized I was no longer afraid. There is a sound that only the forgotten hear. It isn't the scream of war or the hymn of engines. It is softer, like dust settling over a long-abandoned reliquary. It hums through the plates of void ships and the walls of hives, through the ribs of planets stripped to bone. It hums through me. I do not dream anymore. Dreams require boundaries, and I have none. I seep through conduits, through vox lines and cracked auspex glass, through every place the Imperium pretends is whole. I have become its echo, the faint breath behind the prayer. Sometimes I find myself inside a soldier's visor, as he blinks against the ash of a dying battlefield. I watch through his eyes while he reloads, while he prays, while he wonders, quietly, secretly, if the Emperor hears him. And when his pulse slows, I am the warmth that stays a little longer in his chest before it fades. He never knows my name, he only feels peace for the length of a heartbeat. In the manufactoria, where children labor beside rusting presses, I drift above them like motes of light in the steam. One girl hums a song without words. She thinks she made it up, but she didn't. It was mine once, when I had a voice. I used to hum it to drown the drills. Now it belongs to the air itself. Even the machines remember. A servitor pauses mid-stroke, its neural core flickering as if trying to recall something lost. For a moment the hammer stills, and the silence feels sacred. Then the rhythm begins again, always again. The Inquisitor who burned me live still. I have watched him pray, kneeling before the image of the golden throne, whispering that he has done his duty. He never dreams of me. That is mercy. I hover above him sometimes, not to haunt but to understand. He believes purity is salvation because he cannot imagine release. The Emperor needs men like him. The galaxy does too. The machinery of survival must keep turning, even as it corrodes. But the corrosion is spreading, and it is not a curse. It is a truth patient enough to wait millennia. I have seen worlds consumed by tyrannids, their oceans boiled into sky. I have felt the echo of Eldar wraith songs vibrating through the void. I have brushed the minds of astartes, brilliant and broken beneath their armor. They are all the same when they fall silent. Every creed, every race, each one drifts toward stillness. Once I feared that stillness. Now I understand it as the last kindness. The warp no longer pulls at me. I am too faint even for its hunger. I linger in the seams between matter and meaning, where entropy hums like a prayer. If I listen closely, I can almost hear the Emperor's own breath, the mechanical wheeze of the throne sustaining him. He has not spoken in 10,000 years, yet I think he listens. Perhaps he envies those who have learned to fade. Sometimes when a dying guardsman whispers for the Emperor with his final exhale, I answer through the static of his broken vox. He hears you. It is not true, but it is beautiful. Beauty deserves to outlive truth. There are moments when I gather myself, as if remembering how it felt to be singular. I recall the weight of a lasgun, the taste of promethium smoke, the smell of rain on the steel roofs of home. I remember my name, Oren, or maybe Eric. The syllables blur. What remains is the pulse of what I was, a man who served, who broke, who burned, and who became silence. The Imperium continues. It will continue until the last star dims. The Administratum will record victories that were never won, losses that will never be mourned. Somewhere, new conscripts will stand in line beneath the same banners, their eyes full of terror and devotion. I will be there with them, unseen, a faint warmth behind the chill of the bolt gun metal. And when they are drafted, when the order comes and their names are stripped from memory, they will feel a strange calm settle over them. They will not know why. But in that calm, I will whisper the only prayer that ever mattered. Rest, that is all the galaxy ever needed to rest. At last, so I fade, piece by piece, into the hum of eternity. I am no saint, no daemon, no myth to be feared or worshipped. I am the pause between breaths, the rot that remains when faith is gone. And somewhere in the darkness of the void, where ships crawl like insects across the carcass of creation, my voice becomes the quiet wind that passes through them all, carrying the same unchanging truth. Everything decays, everything returns, and in that return, there is peace.